I saw him take my idea, and I still applauded. That moment was not loud, not dramatic like in the movies. It happened in a glass meeting room on the 18th floor of a building in San Francisco, where everything was polished and polite. But to me, it was the moment a part of my future was taken away, right before my eyes, under cold, white lights. Our company was a fast-growing fintech startup. Open office, long tables, glass walls, whiteboards filled with product diagrams and algorithms. The culture here was promoted as transparent and collaborative, but anyone working in this environment understood. Competition always existed. It was just wrapped in professional smiles. I was a data strategist, the one who spent months building an AI model analyzing user behavior to predict spending trends. That idea began from nights I stayed at the office until nearly midnight, when the city outside had already fallen silent. Ethan Cole was a senior product manager. He was tall, confident when speaking, always knowing how to make himself the center. I once believed he was an ally. In internal brainstorm sessions, I shared with him the structure of the algorithm, how I optimized the model, even the demo I was finishing. He listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, nodded as if he truly respected my effort. 1 week later, the board organized a new quarterly product strategy presentation. I walked into the meeting room in a normal state of mind. When Ethan stood up and turned on the first slide, I still thought he would mention me as a co-developer. But the second slide appeared, then the third, and my heartbeat began to slow. The algorithm structure, the model diagram, the illustrative examples, every detail was mine, not different by a pixel. The conflict was not that he used the idea. In a startup environment, everything belonged to the company. The conflict was that he presented it as a personal product, as if he were the one who stayed up late, fixed every line of code, checked every data assumption. I looked around. No one noticed the difference, because I had never sent an official email confirming ownership. I trusted in unspoken fairness. Ethan spoke fluently. He explained the model logic, growth projections, potential to attract investors. The CEO kept nodding. A board member said, "This could be our breakthrough." I felt my throat dry. In my mind were two options: stand up and object right then, or stay silent and observe. I knew if I interrupted, I would need evidence, and I had nothing except memory and personal files in my laptop. The climax came when the CEO smiled and said, "Ethan, I want you to lead this project. Prepare for the next funding round." The whole room applauded. I applauded too. No one saw my hand tremble slightly. Ethan glanced toward me, his eyes lingering for only a second. In that look, there was something like challenge, or perhaps testing what I would do. When the meeting ended, I said nothing. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, looked at the folder containing my entire research process. Hundreds of hours of work compressed into a few slides someone else had just presented. I could immediately email the CEO, could request a private meeting. But I knew the culture here. The one standing on stage always had the advantage. The one who told the story first controlled the story. I asked myself, if I accused him, what would happen? HR might open an investigation. The project might be suspended. I might be labeled difficult to collaborate with. In this environment, reputation was as important as competence. I realized the biggest conflict was not between me and Ethan, but between me and my own choice. That evening, I left the office late. San Francisco was lit up, wind from the bay blowing cold. I stood alone in front of the glass building, looking up at the 18th floor. I felt anger, but it did not explode. My emotion was like a smoldering current, not loud, but deep. I understood one thing. I had just learned how this world operated. My temporary resolution was not retaliation. I decided to observe. I would see how Ethan handled that project. I would see whether he truly understood what he had just presented. And more importantly, I would not forget. I did not shout, did not write a long email, did not post a suggestive status. I chose silence, but it was not the silence of surrender. As I lay in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and thought, My future could not depend on a single meeting room. If that idea was good enough to be stolen, then I was good enough to create something else. Bigger. I did not know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let today's moment become the end. And so, I let him succeed, in a fear he himself had not yet realized. In America, if you do not keep evidence, the truth does not exist. I understood that more clearly than ever in the weeks after that fateful meeting. Ethan walked through the office as if he had just opened the future for the entire company. People shook his hand, congratulated him, talked about the upcoming funding round. As for me, I still sat at my old desk, opening the same data file, but it felt as if I had just been pushed out of the very story I wrote. The setting did not change, but my position in it had. The glass office in San Francisco was still bright, the whiteboard still filled with growth strategies. The CEO still spoke about team spirit. But now, whenever someone mentioned the AI project, they looked toward Ethan. He became the face representing what I had created. That change happened quietly, but decisively. The people around me also changed the way they interacted. A few close colleagues came to ask quietly, "That idea, it was originally yours, right?" I only gave a faint smile. HR sent an email inviting me to join the implementation support team for the project, not as the chief architect, but as someone providing supplementary data. Ethan began appearing in meetings with angel investors, while I received invitations to attend in an observational position. The main conflict was no longer the moment of theft. It shifted to the question, what would I do next? I considered filing a formal complaint. I searched through all notes, drafts, timestamps on my computer. I could prove I had developed the model before the meeting, but everything was within the company's internal system. According to the employment contract, all creations belong to the company, not the individual. And the recognized project representative was the one who officially presented it. I scheduled a meeting with a private consulting lawyer. His office was in downtown, a few blocks from my company. He listened as I presented the story, looked over the files I brought. After a moment of silence, he said, "You can sue, but you will have to prove motive and personal damages. And you will be confronting the very company you are working for." I asked, "Chances of winning?" He replied, "Not certain, but you certainly will not be working there anymore." The rising action was not loud escalation. It was small but continuous changes. Ethan was invited to speak at a small fintech event in the city. The CEO publicly praised him in an all-hands meeting. An internal email announced, "We are proud to appoint Ethan Cole as Director of Product to lead the strategic AI initiative." I read that email twice. My name did not appear anywhere. The climax came when I attended an investor meeting for which I had previously prepared analytical materials. This time, I only sat at the end of the table. The investor asked Ethan about the logic of the model. He answered fluently, but I realized they were points he merely repeated from the summary, not deeply understanding the structure. I could have interjected, could have corrected some technical details, but I did not. I observed. I wanted to see whether he could carry on his own what he had taken. After that meeting, I felt something clearly. If I chose to fight right now, I would enter a prolonged legal and internal battle, full of depletion. If I chose silence, I would keep my position, keep time to think. The falling action of this chapter was not reconciliation, but clarity. I realized I could not expect this system to return fairness to me. I began to see Ethan from another angle. He was no longer just the person who took my idea. He became a symbol of how the system rewarded those who knew how to seize opportunity. I asked myself, if I were in his position, would I have the courage to do the same? That question made me uncomfortable, but it forced me to be honest with myself. The ending of this chapter was not an explosion. I did not file a complaint. I did not publicly expose him. I returned to my desk, continued doing the assigned work, but in my mind, I began outlining another direction. I understood that this battle was not worth winning in the conventional way. If I won, I might regain honor, but I would lose many other things. That night, when I left the office, I no longer felt the anger of the previous week. Instead, there was a clear coldness. I knew I was standing before a long-term choice: stay and accept a supporting role, or leave and build something of my own. I did not decide immediately, but one thing had changed. I was no longer seeking justice within the company. In America, the system operates by contracts and evidence. I did not have enough of either. But I had competence, experience, and most importantly, I had memory. I clearly remembered every line of code, every idea presented inaccurately. And I understood that if I was good enough to create a model, I was also good enough to create a different future. I did not tell anyone about my upcoming decision, but in my mind, a seed had been planted. I would not destroy him by pulling him down. I would let him stand there, on the foundation he believed was solid. And I would leave when I was ready. I could destroy him, but I want him to live. That thought came to me on a very quiet night, when I sat alone in my small apartment in the Mission District, San Francisco. Outside the window, the city was still lit, but inside the room, there was only the faint yellow light from a desk lamp and the steady hum of my computer fan. I was no longer angry like in the first days. I was thinking strategically. My apartment was not large. A desk placed next to the window, a small bookshelf, a few thick printed drafts filled with notes. On the laptop screen was a copy of my entire AI model development process. I reviewed each file, each saved version, each line of comment in the code. I did not do that to torment myself. I did it to clearly remember my value. If I could create that once, I could create it again. I called Marcus Hill, who had been my mentor a few years earlier. He had left San Francisco to move to Austin, Texas, where the startup ecosystem was developing quickly and less suffocating than Silicon Valley. Marcus listened to my entire story without interrupting. After a few seconds of silence, he asked, "Do you want justice, or do you want power?" That question made me pause. The biggest conflict now was no longer Ethan. It was the struggle inside me. If I publicly told the truth, I could make Ethan lose his position, lose his reputation. I could become someone pitied or admired for daring to stand up. But at the same time, I would also be seen as someone who created internal conflict, someone who brought tension into the open. In the tech industry, personal image was as important as achievements. Marcus continued, "If you pull him down, the story will end there. But if you build something bigger, the story will last his entire life." I understood what he meant. Power was not in destroying someone else. It was in the ability to make someone wonder whether the past might return to haunt them. In the following days, I observed Ethan more carefully. He began managing the development team, but I realized he relied heavily on the documentation I had left behind. In a technical meeting, he looked at me when facing a difficult question. I answered briefly, professionally, without showing any attitude. I wanted him to know that I understood everything, and I wanted him to wonder what I was thinking. The rising action of this chapter was the change in how I saw the future. I began updating my LinkedIn profile, not publicly job hunting, but opening connection possibilities. I researched the startup ecosystem in Austin, read about operating costs, about seed funds. I did not act hastily. I prepared. Every step was calculated. The climax came one afternoon when HR announced team restructuring to optimize resources. I was officially transferred to a supporting data analysis role, reporting directly to Ethan. That meant I would work under the authority of the person who took my idea. I stared at that email for a long time. In that moment, I understood that if I stayed, I would gradually accept that position as normal. I opened a new file on my laptop and typed the title, 12-month plan. I did not write about how to sue. I wrote about how to leave. I listed my savings, calculated living expenses if I moved to Austin, identified skills I needed to strengthen to build my own product. My decision did not explode. It was quiet, but decisive. The falling action of this chapter was my final meeting with Marcus before I submitted my resignation. I flew to Austin one weekend, met him at a small cafe. The city had a completely different rhythm from San Francisco. Less glamorous, but dynamic and practical. Marcus looked at me and said, "If you go, do not carry resentment. Carry the lesson." I nodded. I knew I did not want to build my future on hatred. When I returned to San Francisco, I wrote my resignation letter. The letter was brief, professional, not mentioning any conflict. I felt lighter when I pressed send. Ethan read my email the next morning. He walked to my desk and asked, "Are you sure?" I looked straight at him and answered, "I want a new challenge. No more, no less." The resolution of this chapter was not revenge. It was redirection. I did not destroy him. I did not tell the board the truth. I left to build something bigger. I left behind an unanswered question for Ethan. Would I ever tell that story? On my last night in the Mission District apartment, I closed my suitcase, looked around the room growing emptier. I did not feel defeated. I felt like I was leaving an old chapter. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. But I also knew one thing. I did not need to expose him to prove my value. I could destroy him, but I chose to let him live. Live with the memory of how he succeeded. And live with the possibility that one day, I would succeed even more. He thought I disappeared, but I was only preparing. When the plane landed in Austin, Texas, I looked out the window and told myself this was not an escape. This was a reset. This city did not have the towering glass buildings and frantic pace like San Francisco. It was wider, hotter, and had a straightforward, practical feeling. I did not bring resentment with me. I brought experience. The first weeks in Austin were not glamorous. I rented a small apartment near downtown, placed a desk against the wall, and started from almost zero. No team, no brand, no investors. Just me and a new idea gradually taking shape. This time, I did not want to repeat the old model. I did not just want to improve the algorithm. I wanted to build a complete platform, where behavioral data not only predicted trends, but also automatically adjusted strategies in real time. My setting now was crowded co-working spaces, where young founders exchanged conversations about seed funding and MVPs. I sat among them, listening more than speaking. I learned how to present ideas concisely, succinctly, without revealing the entire structure like before. The lesson in San Francisco had changed me. This time, I recorded every development step, emailed confirmations to myself, stored documents with clear timestamps. I no longer believed in unspoken fairness. A new character entered the story, Olivia Grant, a well-known angel investor in the Austin startup community. I met her at a small networking event. When I presented my idea, I did not mention Ethan, did not mention the past. I only spoke about the market problem and the solution I was building. Olivia asked sharp questions about scalability and competitive advantage. I answered calmly, based on data and real experience. The main conflict of this chapter was no longer betrayal. It was the question, was I capable enough to build again from scratch? Without a big reputation backing me, without a ready team, I worked 16 hours a day. During the day, I attended meetings. At night, I rewrote every line of code. There were moments I doubted myself. There were moments I remembered the meeting room in San Francisco and wondered what I was trying to prove. The rising action came when I completed the first MVP version of Mercer Analytics. I named the company after my own surname, not out of arrogance, but because I wanted to attach personal responsibility to the product. I sent the demo to Olivia. A week later, she asked to meet again. In that meeting, she said, "You are not just building a product, you are building a system." That sentence made me realize I was on the right path. The climax of this chapter was the private pitch with a small group of investors introduced by Olivia. I stood before them, without flashy performance, only clear slides and a live demo. I explained how the model learned over time, how it automatically adjusted marketing strategies based on real behavioral data. When the Q&A ended, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then one investor said, "We are interested in the seed round." The following action was tense negotiations about equity percentages and company valuation. I was no longer an employee presenting ideas for someone else. I was a founder negotiating for my own future. Eventually, Mercer Analytics officially received its first seed investment. I signed the contract with a feeling both calm and explosive inside. The resolution of this chapter was not a loud victory. I did not post a long story about being betrayed. I did not mention my former company's name. I only posted a short line on LinkedIn announcing that Mercer Analytics officially launched in Austin. The response came faster than I expected. Some former colleagues messaged congratulations. Among them was a message from Ethan. Congratulations. Impressive. I read that message without anger. I simply realized that now the balance had shifted. I was no longer in a defensive position. I was building something of my own, on a foundation I controlled. Ethan might still think I left to start over from scratch. He did not know that every step I took had been calculated since the day I left the meeting room on the 18th floor. On the evening Mercer Analytics officially had its first small office, I stayed alone after everyone had gone home. I looked at the company name on the glass door and remembered the Mission District apartment growing empty the day I left. I did not feel the need to expose anyone. This success was not built on someone else's destruction. It was built on the decision to remain silent at the right time. He thought I disappeared, but I was only preparing. And now, I was ready for the next chapter. 5 years later, I heard my name again, from the mouths of people who once overlooked me. That moment did not arrive through a dramatic phone call or a sensational article. It came on an ordinary morning at the Mercer Analytics office in Austin, when I walked into the meeting room and saw my team discussing the upcoming Series A funding round. I looked at the last quarter's revenue board on the screen and understood that we had gone further than I had ever imagined in that small apartment years ago. Our office was not as large as companies in San Francisco, but it carried a different energy. The glass boards were filled with growth strategies. A corner of the room displayed a customer map stretching across multiple states. My team now had more than 30 people, from data engineers to marketing specialists. They did not know my entire story. They only knew I was the one who built this company from the ground up and demanded the highest discipline in every detail. Olivia Grant remained our strategic investor. In that morning meeting, she said, "If the Series A round succeeds, we will expand to Chicago and New York." I listened without showing too much emotion, but inside me there was a quiet movement. Chicago, New York. Those names once belonged to the world of people like Ethan. Now they belonged to my plan. The main conflict of this chapter was no longer survival. It was the collision between the past and the present. When Mercer Analytics began appearing in regional tech news, I received an invitation for an interview from a business magazine. During the interview, the journalist asked, "Where did you work before founding the company?" I answered truthfully, "I worked at a fintech startup in San Francisco." I did not mention the company's name, but I knew people in the industry were smart enough to connect the dots. The rising action began when the article was published. The headline did not mention betrayal. It spoke of a founder building a self-learning AI system from scratch. But at the end of the article, the journalist mentioned my experience in San Francisco and how I left to pursue my own vision. Those lines did not accuse anyone, but they suggested enough for readers to ask questions. A few days later, I received an email from a former colleague. The message was brief. "The whole office is talking about this article." I read the email in silence. I did not need to ask what they were talking about. I knew. The tech market operates on reputation, and reputation spreads faster than any press release. The climax came when a West Coast investment fund, which had once worked with my former company, sent an invitation to meet. In the online meeting, one of the partners looked at me and asked, "We once heard about an AI project very similar to this a few years ago in San Francisco. Were you involved?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds. I answered, "I always work on ideas I believe in, neither denying nor confirming, just enough for them to understand that I was not outside the story." After that meeting, I received a message from Ethan. "Nice article, congratulations." The message was short, emotionless. I looked at those words, and for the first time in many years, I wondered what he was thinking. Was he worried that one day I would tell everything clearly? Or did he believe I would remain silent forever? The falling action of this chapter was the shift in the balance of power. I did not need to name him to create impact. The mere existence of Mercer Analytics, the steady growth and positive media coverage, had already begun to move the past. People who once worked with us began reconnecting with me on LinkedIn. A few sent private messages, admitting that they had always known where the original idea came from. I did not respond with bitterness. I only said, "Thank you for believing." I did not collect testimonies. I did not prepare a file to reopen the case. I simply continued working. I understood that my greatest power now was not evidence. It was position. The resolution of this chapter was not confrontation. It was silence with weight. When the Series A round officially closed and we announced expansion plans, I stood before my team and said, "We build value through competence, not through controversy." That sentence was not only for them, it was for myself. That evening, I stayed late at the office. I looked through the glass at the lit city of Austin below. I remembered the 18th floor in San Francisco and the applause years ago. The difference now was that I no longer needed recognition from any meeting room. I had created my own meeting room. 5 years ago, I let him succeed in a fear he had not yet realized. Now I wondered whether he had begun to feel it. I never threatened him, but he began to live as if I had. I realized that when my name appeared on the speaker list of a major AI conference held in Las Vegas. At that time, Mercer Analytics had expanded to 2 states. The team was nearly 50 people, and we had just signed a contract with a national retail corporation. The keynote invitation was not a personal title. It was a sign that I had entered the same arena where years ago, Ethan once confidently stood at the center. The conference took place in a massive convention center, bright lights everywhere, technology booths arranged in long rows. I walked past familiar logos of companies that once collaborated with my former startup. The feeling was not nervousness. It was a strange stillness, as if I was returning to a familiar place, but with a completely different position. Ethan was also present at that conference. I knew this before arriving because the schedule was publicly announced. He was now VP Product at the former company, continuing to expand the AI project he once took from me. When I saw his name on the panel discussion list, I did not feel anger. I felt curiosity. The main conflict of this chapter was not a direct confrontation. It was the invisible tension between 2 paths that diverged from the same starting point. During Ethan's panel, I sat in the back row. He spoke about the future of AI and customer behavior analysis, using terms familiar to me. The audience nodded, took notes. But I noticed something. Whenever there was a question digging deep into the core structure, he answered more vaguely than before. The rising action began when an investor in the audience asked, "I heard you once worked with Jude Mercer. You two developed this project together, didn't you?" The whole room turned their heads. I did not move. Ethan paused for a beat, his smile remaining on his lips. He answered, "We worked together in the early stage, and I truly appreciate every contribution from the team at that time." A neutral answer, neither denying nor confirming. That moment was not loud. No one argued, but I felt the shift in the air. My name had been placed next to the project in public, not by me, but by someone else. I understood that I did not need to speak. My presence in that room was enough to create pressure. The climax came in the evening, in the private networking area for speakers and investors. Ethan took the initiative to approach me. He shook my hand, the familiar smile, but his eyes were no longer completely confident as before. "Long time no see," he said. I nodded. "Yes." We stood facing each other amid soft music and murmuring conversations around us. Ethan lowered his voice. "Your speech was impressive." I replied, "Thank you." A short silence, then he asked, "Do you still think about what happened back then?" The question was more direct than I expected. I looked at him for a few seconds before answering. "I think about the future more than the past." I did not emphasize, did not imply, just a simple sentence. but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. In that moment, I understood that fear did not come from accusation. It came from the possibility of accusation. The falling action of this chapter was the brief conversation ending sooner than expected. Ethan said he had to meet another investor and left first. I remained standing, watching his back blend into the crowd. I did not feel victorious. I simply felt that balance had been restored. The next day, I stepped onto the keynote stage. I did not mention the past. I did not tell my personal story. I spoke about self-learning systems, about ethical responsibility in AI development, about building transparent and sustainable foundations. When the speech ended, the hall applauded. This time, I did not need to pretend. The resolution of this chapter did not lie in who was right or wrong. It lay in the fact that I had reached a position where my silence carried weight. I did not need threatening emails. I did not need accusatory articles. Every time my name appeared on a speaker list, every time Mercer Analytics signed a new contract, the past was naturally recalled. On the flight back to Austin, I looked out the window as the lights of Las Vegas grew smaller below. I wondered whether Ethan slept well that night. I had never threatened him. I had never said that I would tell everything. But now, he knew that I could. And sometimes, just the existence of that possibility is enough to make someone begin to fear. We met again in New York, not in a closed meeting room, but in the middle of a global AI conference with thousands of attendees. This city had a rhythm completely different from Austin and San Francisco. Fast, decisive, and uninterested in anyone's personal story unless it created value. I came here as a keynote speaker representing Mercer Analytics, a company that had officially opened a representative office in Chicago and was preparing to expand to the East Coast. I stood in the hotel lobby where the conference was held, looking through the tall glass window down at the characteristic yellow taxis of Manhattan. I was no longer the person sitting at the end of the meeting table. I was no longer the employee transferred to a supporting role. But the memory was still there, like a faint background layer behind every success. Ethan was also present. This time, he was not only attending a panel, but also had a private meeting with a major investment fund. We knew in advance about each other's presence through the public schedule, but seeing him walk into the VIP networking room still created an invisible pause between us. The conflict of this chapter was no longer the question of who was right or wrong. It was the direct confrontation between two people who once stood at the same starting point. Ethan moved toward me first. He shook my hand, his eyes probing but maintaining perfect politeness. "Congratulations on Chicago," he said. I nodded. "Thank you." We stood next to the bar, each holding a glass of water but neither drinking. Ethan looked around briefly and then spoke more quietly. "This industry is small. People are starting to connect the stories." I understood what he meant without him having to clarify. The articles, the speeches, the public questions in Las Vegas, all were forming a picture he did not fully control. The rising action took place within that very conversation. Ethan asked directly, "Do you intend to tell the old story?" No roundabout phrasing, no implication. I looked at him for a few seconds. I did not feel anger. I only clearly saw the worry hidden behind that question. The worry that one day, an interview, a book, or a public conversation would place his name in an unwanted position. I answered slowly, "I don't need to tell that story to build my company." I added nothing more. No promise of eternal silence. No threat to speak out. Just a simple truth. I built Mercer Analytics with my competence, not with scandal. The climax came when Ethan said something I did not expect. "I did what I thought was necessary at the time." That sentence was not an apology. It was a justification. I listened without reacting immediately. I realized he was not afraid of legal consequences. He was afraid of being perceived incorrectly in the eyes of the tech industry, afraid of losing the image he had built over many years. I responded, "We all live with our decisions." That sentence closed the remaining part of the conversation. No one mentioned details again. No one dug deeper. But we both understood that real power at this point did not lie in the past. It lay in the future each of us was building. The falling action was when we left the VIP room and stepped back into the main area of the conference. Ethan walked toward a group of investors waiting for him. I stepped onto the stage for the next panel discussion. When the lights shone down and my name appeared on the big screen, I felt the difference compared to the 18th floor years ago. This time, I was not standing in anyone's shadow. During the Q&A session, a young audience member asked me, "Have you ever faced betrayal in your career?" The question was unexpected, but did not make me uneasy. I answered, "In business, what matters is not avoiding every mistake of others. What matters is how you respond without losing your own value." I did not tell a specific story, but I knew Ethan was sitting somewhere in the audience. The resolution of this chapter was not an apology or an exposure. It was the silent recognition that we had taken two different paths. I did not destroy him. He could not erase me from his story either. We existed in parallel within the same industry, but with different weights. When the conference ended, I stood alone outside the hotel looking up at the New York night sky. This city did not care who was right 5 years ago. It only cared who was creating value today. I realized I no longer carried anger. I carried something else. The confidence that I did not need to expose anyone to be recognized. We met again, spoke like two professional entrepreneurs. But behind that politeness was a clear truth. I had the power to tell that story, and I chose not to. Sometimes the greatest power does not lie in speaking the truth. It lies in deciding when the truth should remain silent. The greatest revenge is not destroying someone, but letting them live with their own story. I understood that more clearly than ever when Mercer Analytics officially opened an office in Chicago and announced plans to expand to New York. 5 years ago, I left the 18th floor in San Francisco with a short resignation letter. Now, I stood in the meeting room of my own company, watching the leadership team discuss the next 3-year strategy. Chicago welcomed me with its characteristic cold and a market full of potential. The new office was not large, but it was designed transparently with glass walls and open space. I walked past the Mercer Analytics name placed right at the entrance and felt a deep quietness inside. Not gloating, not excessive pride, just a feeling of completing a circle. My setting now was no longer a personal battle. It was responsibility toward dozens of employees, toward investors, toward clients. I did not think about Ethan every day anymore, but his name still existed somewhere in the background of the story, like a variable that could not be completely removed from the equation. 1 week after we announced expansion, I received a proposal for an in-depth interview from a national tech magazine. They wanted to write about the journey of building Mercer Analytics from almost nothing to its current position. In the preliminary discussion, the journalist asked, "Did you leave a former company under complicated circumstances?" I knew they had heard something. The final conflict of this story was no longer between me and Ethan. It was between me and the choice to tell or not to tell. If I clearly named the company and the person, the story would explode. It would create a tension, controversy, possibly even shake Ethan's position. If I remained silent, I would continue my path without creating turbulence. I sat alone in the Chicago office that evening, looking at the river and the city lights reflecting on the water. I remembered the meeting years ago, my own fake applause, Ethan's look when the CEO handed him the project. I also remembered the Mission District apartment, the 12-month plan, the flight to Austin. Everything led to this moment. The rising action took place within my own thoughts. I opened my laptop, reread the draft interview the journalist had sent in advance. There was a section asking directly, "Have you ever had an idea stolen?" I knew that with just one straightforward answer, the story would turn in a different direction. I typed a few lines, then deleted them. I wrote again, then deleted. The climax did not come from confrontation, but from a simple decision. I edited the answer to, "In my career, I learned that the greatest ownership is the ability to continue creating." No names mentioned, no details told. I sent the revised version back to the journalist. The article was published a week later. It focused on the self-learning system, on how Mercer Analytics built a transparent culture, on a philosophy of sustainable development. No scandal, no accusation. But between the lines, readers could still sense that I had gone through some kind of trial. The falling action of this story was the normal continuation of life. Mercer Analytics signed more contracts. We hired more staff. I participated in talks about ethics in technology. Ethan continued to appear in the industry, continued speaking at conferences. But every time my name was mentioned alongside successful projects, I knew he would wonder, is today the day the past returns? The resolution was not his collapse. I did not witness his destruction, nor did I wish for it. The resolution was that I slept well every night, without feeling that something had been taken from me. I did not need to reclaim that old project. I had built something far bigger. One evening in New York, after completing the procedures for the new office, I stood on the rooftop of the building and looked down at the rushing crowd. This city did not know the detailed story between Ethan and me, and it did not need to. What mattered was that I knew how I responded when I was pushed into a corner. The greatest revenge is not destroying someone. It is proving that you can be pushed off the stage, yet still be capable of building another stage, bigger and more sustainable. I had the opportunity to expose him. I had the opportunity to turn that story into a weapon. I did not do it. And precisely because I did not do it, he has to live with a silent fear.